TFA fam, welcome back in. It is already week 7. We are just rolling right through this NFL season as always. But let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and dive into our top 24 running back rankings for your week 7 fantasy lineups. Our RB1s are as follows: Christian McCaffrey at 1, followed by Ken Walker at 2, Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Swift, Bijan Robinson, Isaiah Pacheco, Saquon Barkley, Travis Etienne, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, and Raheem Mostert rounding out our top 12. Kev, who are some of the running backs that the folks should know out of our RB1s for week 7?
Yeah, I think Kenneth Walker should be viewed as the RB1 on this week. His heavy usage continues. Week 6, he handled 76% of the snaps, 86% of the rush attempts, 54% of the routes with a 9% target share, which beats Charbonnet in every single category this past week. He's also fourth in red zone touches with an 8.2% target share. Isn't great, but it's fine for the most part, but he is eighth in fantasy points per game. Really, his production has been carried by his touch. He has not clipped 100 yards yet in a game, but he does get a great matchup on this week against the Arizona Cardinals. They've allowed the fourth most rushing yards, the fifth most rushing touchdowns, and the third most fantasy points to the position. So Kenneth Walker is in another great spot this week. Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about Christian McCaffrey. We'll have to see on his availability. They do play on Monday night, so we'll have to see if that extra day will give him the ability to play on Monday night. But if not, I would expect Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell to split the touches here from this backfield. But we'll wait and see on Christian McCaffrey. But I did want to include him here. Next up, let's talk about DeAndre Swift. They played the Miami Dolphins, and this is the highest total on this weekend. It's kind of a really gross week in terms of implied totals this week. This game is the crown jewel of this weekend with the highest total on the slate at 52. And Miami does struggle against the run. DeAndre Swift is handling 62% of the opportunities, and he's also 12th in red zone touches with a 9th in target share as well. He is 17th in yards per route run and 9th in true yards per carry. He continues to be the 1A within this offense at running back, 53% of their RB attempts, 56% of the routes, and a 21% target share. Compared that to Kenneth Gainwell, who has 42% of the snaps and 11% of the RB attempts on the season. So this is a good matchup. Miami allows the 9th most rushing yards, the 7th most rushing touchdowns, and the 13th most fantasy points to running back. So I do expect DeAndre Swift to see a large workload here within this game, and he should be heavily involved in the passing game as well. So DeAndre Swift, you can fire him up with confidence. Next up, let's talk about Aaron Jones. He gets a great matchup this week. I do expect Aaron Jones to return coming off their week 6 bye. And not a better time when you get to face the Denver Broncos. The Broncos have allowed the most fantasy points by a wide margin, over 6 fantasy points per game to the position. They also allowed the most rushing yards and the second most touchdowns and receiving yards as well. A.J. Dillon looks a lot better last week before they went on bye, and I think he is a high-end RB3 as well. And then Isaiah Pacheco is the next guy here against the LA Chargers. On the season, he's playing 55% of the snaps, handling 70% of the RB rush attempts, and with a 10% target share. He's also 9th in red zone touches, 5th in yards per route run, and 7th in yards created per touch on the season. And he started a little bit slow, where he started at 14.5 fantasy points per game. However, since week 3, he's averaged almost 18 PPR points per game. And this is a good matchup against the Chargers, who have allowed the 12th most rushing yards, the 15th most touchdowns, and the 4th most receiving yards, as well as the 10th most fantasy points per game. So this is a really good matchup here for Isaiah Pacheco. I think he's a top 10 running back this week. Next up, let's talk about two running backs from the same game, Alvin Kamara and Travis Etienne. Alvin Kamara, in the 3 games that he's been back, is handling a hefty 77% of the opportunities. He also has a 23% target share, and he's 8th in route participation. 19.2 fantasy points per game is 6th most among all running backs. But he has been pretty inefficient, 3.8 true yards per carry, which is 38th among all running backs, and 39th in yards created per touch. Now, the Jaguars have been good against running backs, but there's one area where he should shine, because they have allowed the 5th fewest rushing yards and the 8th fewest touchdowns to running backs, but they have allowed the 7th most receiving yards, which is where I think Alvin Kamara comes in. And obviously, with his 23% target share, he should still be able to get his this week, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Move over to Travis Etienne's side of this. Now, he has been handling almost all of the touches, 80% of the opportunities. That's the 4th highest rate among all running backs, 9th in targets. He's also 1st in carries and 22nd in red zone touches. His 11.5% target share is excellent, and he's also 4th in route participation among all running backs, and he's 16th in yards per route run. His 19.2 fantasy points per game is 5th most. This is not a great matchup. The Saints have allowed the 9th fewest rushing yards, They have allowed 0 touchdowns altogether on the season to running backs, and then 19th most fantasy points. So with Travis Etienne seeing such an elite usage share, he's always going to be in play, and he's always going to be looked as an RB1 because when you're handling this kind of touches, you don't have to be elite to really shine on a week to week basis. So I am tempering my expectations compared to what we have been, where Travis Etienne's been much more as a top 5 running back. This week, he's more at the bottom end of an RB.
The only thing I'll tack on here, Kev, you were talking about ETN's elite usage. You can't talk about elite usage without mentioning Josh Jacobs. First in weighted opportunities, third in carries, first in targets, and third in red zone touches. Now they get a matchup against the Bears, who are allowing the fourth most fantasy points per game to the position. So just had to throw him in there, show him some love. I have him ranked a little bit higher than you do, but he is another one of these running backs that's just in a fantastic spot this week. Let's go ahead and move it over to our RB2s for the week. Kicking it off at 13 is Brian Robinson, followed by Jerome Ford, James Cook, Roshan Johnson, Javonte Williams, Ramondre Stevenson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kareem Hunt, Rashad White, Jonathan Taylor, Zach Moss, and Jaleel McLaughlin at RB24. Kev, same thing, RB2s. What should the folks know for week 7?
Yeah, I'm going to start things off with Brian Robinson, who's in a really good spot this week against the Giants. He's handling 70% of the opportunities, and he's 14th in red zone touches. His 5 touchdowns is 7th most among all running backs, and his 14.1 fantasy points per game ranks puts him at 17th overall. He also has a 6.5% target share and a really bad 33.2% route participation, but he is 10th in yards per route run. Really, Antonio Gibson has been handling pretty much most of all the pass catching work, where Brian Robinson is getting the grinder work, that first and second down. And this is a great matchup for that. The Giants have allowed the 3rd most rushing yards and the 3rd most touchdowns, as well as the 7th most fantasy points per game. So I really like Brian Robinson this week in a matchup against this Giants defense that really struggles to stop opposing running backs. And then Jerome Ford. There's a lot of talk this week about Kareem Hunt had taken over the backfield, and it's now Kareem Hunt's job and all that, which is just ridiculous because it's not even true. Because Ford still handled 51% of the snaps, 52% of the rush attempts, 35% of the routes, and a 6% target share. Compare that to Kareem Hunt, who only handled 37% of the snaps, 36% of the rush attempts, and also ran 32% of the routes. Ford has also been an RB2 or better in every game since week 1. He's also 7th in yards after contact per attempt and 22nd in missed tackles forced and 31st in yards per route run. I do expect Kareem Hunt that he's going to continue to operate within this offense, and that's why I have Kareem Hunt as an RB2 this week, but he's a low-end RB2. Jerome Ford is still the RB1 within this backfield, and he's done nothing to lose that job. Now, Indy has struggled against running backs this year as they've allowed the 14th most rushing yards and the 3rd most touchdowns, and they've also allowed the 9th most receiving yards and the 12th most fantasy points to running backs. So this is a very good matchup for both of these two running backs that operate within this offense. So Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt are both RB2s this week. Let's move it over to Roshan Johnson. He should be available this week after missing week 6 due to a concussion. Roshan has been solid and with the limited workload that he's already seen. He's 15th in true yards per carry, 18th in yards per route run. Foreman was pretty mid this past week against the Vikings with 15 carries for 65 yards. Now, this week they take on the Las Vegas Raiders, who right now could be a matchup of 2 backup quarterbacks. And so I do expect both these running backs to get a lot of opportunity because they're going to want to limit both of their quarterbacks. So we'll see on that what happens here, but it does not look good for either one of these starting quarterbacks, Justin Fields or Jimmy Garoppolo. Right now, next up, let's talk about Javonte Williams against Green Bay. Javonte looked really explosive on Thursday night against the Giants, ripping off 51 yards on 11 carries. Now, when you talk about Javonte Williams, people talk about him like he's just been dreadful this year, and it's really not the truth. He still has handled 51% of the opportunities, but he's also seen 10.6% target share, which is 20th among all running backs. He is 20th in yards per route run, 24th in yards after contact per attempt, and 13th in breakaway run rate this year. Now, don't get me wrong, Jaleel McLaughlin has looked good, and he is a definite flex option this week in a solid matchup against the Packers. But Javonte Williams, in his own right, I think has started to look more and more like the guy he was before last year's injury. So I do expect Javonte Williams is still going to handle the lion's share of the RB touches from this backfield, at least the RB attempts. And hopefully he gets more involved in the passing game because he has been good there as well. But I think both of these running backs, both of these guys are viable options this week, especially with so many teams on bye. We have 6 teams on bye this week. So that's why a lot of these running back combos are being pushed up as both of them are options. And then Green Bay has been really bad against running back, allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the position. So great matchup here for the Denver backfield. Next up, let's talk about this Indianapolis Colts situation that continues to revolve here. And week 6, we saw a little bit more of an equal split here. Jonathan Taylor handled 43% of the snaps, 53% of the rush attempts, 25% of the routes with an 8% target share. Zach Moss handled 49% of the snaps, but only 47% of the rush attempts, 40% of the routes, and a 14% target share. Now, obviously, Zach Moss put up a better day with 18 PPR points to only 12 PPR points for Jonathan Taylor. I do think both these guys are going to be kind of viable and until Jonathan Taylor really starts to really eat away at this and really puts Zach Moss down for the count. And now I will say this is not a good matchup. Cleveland versus running backs has been really, really good this year. They've allowed the 4th fewest rushing yards and only 2 total touchdowns to the running back position. And they've allowed the 16th fewest fantasy points on the season. So this is a tough matchup here for both of these starting running backs. I do think both of them are still viable low end RB2s, but it is getting to a point where I think Jonathan Taylor is eventually going to eat into this and start taking the lion's share of the opportunities from this backfield.
Yeah, it is a gross week between injuries and bye weeks. So I really don't have anything else to tack on for the RB2s, but a little bit more down the ranks here, Kev. Are there any other names that you think folks should either be looking at or maybe avoiding in week 7?
One, I think Jalen Warren. I really like him. I really wanted to get him as an RB2, just couldn't. But he's been fantastic so far this year. But he's handling 45% of the snaps, 30% of the rush attempts, and with a 16% target share. He has been an RB2 in 3 of the 5 weeks, but he's been a top 36 running back every single week of the season. He's been extremely efficient, 3rd in yards created per touch, 15th in breakaway run rate, and 2nd yards per out run. He continues to be the more efficient, the better running back of this backfield. And I'm going to continue to say it though. Najee Harris isn't going away. He's going to continue to see touches, but so which is going to hurt both of them this week. But I still like Jalen Warren a lot. The Rams situation. I know Zach Evans is probably going to be a name that a lot of people look at, but they have brought in a ton of running backs this week. They brought in Myles Gaskin they signed him off the Miami Dolphins practice squad. And so they have Royce Freeman, and this is going to feels like a situation a lot like the Cardinal situation last week, right? We thought it was going to be Amari DiMercardo and Keontae Ingram, and all of a sudden it was Damian Williams who they signed off somebody's practice squad and brought in, right? I am not going to tie my wagon to Zach Evans right now and think that he's going to be the guy. He's been a healthy scratch all year. He really hasn't been given any opportunity. They don't seem like they love him all that much. They have very little draft capital invested in him. So honestly, I just don't know what to do with this backfield. It wouldn't shock me if it was Myles Gaskin. Myles Gaskin has been productive in the past when he was with the Miami Dolphins, but I just don't really know what to do. So if we get win, the Zach Evans, but we also heard that last week with Amari DiMercardo, right? They talked about him, said they're really excited about him, that he's going to be the guy. He's going to see a lot of touches and all that stuff. It didn't happen. So I don't trust a lot of what the head coach says. So if I can avoid it, I don't want to play Zach Evans, but if you're forced to, I get it because of bye weeks and such. So, but I'm just not trusting him whatsoever.
Yeah, just throw out a couple other like waiver wire type guys. You mentioned Keontae Ingram when you're talking about DeMercado going up against Seattle. Like I think if you had to, depending on like I said, injuries, bye weeks, he's like a desperation type of RB2. Craig Reynolds, I think, is a name that should be in the mix. Seems like Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be good to go this week, but he's also going to be coming off of that hamstring injury. And we know that what he really brings to the table is his explosiveness. So I still expect to see Craig Reynolds involved in this matchup. And then Elijah Mitchell, you mentioned Jordan Mason. I think Elijah Mitchell is a name to pay attention to as well. It seems like there's some conflicting information out there, amongst the Twitter doctors, so to speak. But it seems like, CMC could potentially miss upwards of 2 weeks here. Whatever ends up happening, I don't know, but I still think it's 100% worth going out and grabbing Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason if you're able to at the time you see this, just in case something happens where CMC is, knocked out for a week or two. And I think even if CMC plays, we see him more in a rotation on Monday because of that. They cannot risk anything long-term happening to him. So I think some of those deeper names, waiver wire names, are in play for this week. Again, 6 teams on bye, running back injuries. It's gross, so you can consider them as well. That is going to wrap it up. Please be sure to hit us with a like and a sub. Any questions you have, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. You can also join our Discord, and you can also join us live on Wednesday night at 10:30 as we will be going through and doing our weekly start sit show for the week. So hope to see you there. Good luck this week, and we'll talk to you soon.